Welcome everyone to the MOOC course on Introduction to Sociology 2. Today we will discuss the topic of Saussure's structuralism. Ferdinand de Saussure is known as the father of linguistics, and he is the person who developed the theory of structuralism in linguistics. Now, while structuralism is essentially a linguistic theory, it has tremendous significance for the social world and for sociology as a discipline. The contributions of Saussure are primarily in the field of linguistics, and from there we will discuss how Saussure's linguistics has an important role to play in the development of sociology as a discipline as well, and how it can be connected to the material social world. The meaning of structuralism. Structuralism refers to the idea of the study of structures. In this case, we will be studying the structure of language. We will also be studying how the structure of language is connected to the structure of society and how we perceive the social world. The importance of studying structuralism is that we may feel that structuralism is a discipline that is limited to the linguistic domain. We may feel that it may not have a role to play in the material social world. However, the fact is, the study of structuralism is immensely relevant both in the realm of linguistics and in the realm of the material social world. Structuralism as a study focuses on how language is formed, and the way we perceive the world is always through the prism of language, through the lens of language. Therefore, language as a phenomenon is not detached from the material social world. In order to live our daily lives, we need the realm of language. Therefore, socio-structuralism is most certainly connected to the world of sociology and the social world of phenomena as well. Now we will study the contributions of Saussure in the field of linguistics and how it connects to the social world. The works of Saussure have been compiled in the book A Course in General Linguistics. In it, Saussure has discussed the nature and the structure of the linguistic sign. The linguistic sign, according to Saussure, can be decomposed into two parts, the signifier and the signified. The sign, according to Saussure, is thus made up of two components. One is the word with which we express the concept, and secondly, the concept which is being expressed by the word. Therefore, the linguistic sign has the word with which we are expressing it, which is known as the signifier, because the word is the signifier, it signifies something. And what it is infused with, the content of it, is called the signified, which is the concept which is being expressed. The concept or the signified is also associated with meaning. Therefore, we have two parts, the signifier and the signified, both of which come together to meaningfully make the sign. Now, the sign is more than the sum of its parts. The sign is not just an addition of the signifier and the signified, it is a more complex and a more abstract reality in its own right. Now, both the sign and the signifier as well as the signified, all three of these entities belong to the realm of language. The sign, the signifier and the signified, all three are abstract entities. These are entities which we imagine and which we communicate with each other, and they belong in the realm of language. If we come to the material world, if we come to the material social world, then we will find that there are endless objects in this world which are waiting to be represented in the realm of language. Now, these material objects which can be represented in the realm of language are known as referents. The sign is supposed to represent the referent. The sign, which is made up of the signifier and the signified, is supposed to represent the referents that exist in our material social world. Now, the referents may be objects which can be perceived by our five senses. We can see them, or we may not be able to see them, but we can hear them, or we can touch them, we can smell them, we can taste them. Things that we can perceive with our five senses are the referents. They belong in the material world. And when we need to represent these referents in the realm of language, we need the help of the sign. It is through the sign, it is through the help of the linguistic sign that we are able to communicate the meanings that we want to convey to those who are listening to us. So, Saussure says that the structure of the linguistic sign is composed of these entities. And secondly, he also says the relationship between the signifier and the signified, as well as the relationship between the sign and the referent, is arbitrary. With this, we come to the nature of the linguistic sign. Why does Saussure say that the relationship between the sign and the referent is arbitrary? This is because if, for example, we take the material reality of a tree exists. However, the word tree, which is the sign with which we represent the referent, has nothing to do with the material quality of a tree. There is nothing tree-like about the word tree, just like there is nothing dog-like about the word dog. There is nothing cat-like about the word cat. So the signs, the words with which we represent the material reality, with which we represent the referent, have nothing to do, have no organic, they do have something to do, but they do not have an organic or logical connection with the referent. There is nothing tree-like about the word tree. Further, the relationship between the signifier and the signified is also arbitrary. When we use a certain word to represent a certain concept, we do not know why they are linked with each other. Why do we use the word cat to represent the idea of a cat? Why do we use the word pen to represent the idea of a pen? We do not have a logical or organic connection between the word that we use and the concept that it represents. Therefore, the relationship within the sign itself, which is the relationship between the signifier and the signified, as well as the relationship between the sign and the referent, both these relationships are arbitrary, which is why Saussure says that the nature of the linguistic sign is arbitrary. The structure of the linguistic sign is twofold, and its nature is primarily arbitrary. Now let us look at the nature of the signifier. The nature of the signifier, according to Saussure, is linear. We will look at how it is linear. The signifier is the word that is used to express a concept. Every word that I'm uttering right now is a signifier, and every word that I'm uttering is making sense to the listener because it is infused with a signified. It is infused with meaning, and it is meaningful to you because you know the language that I'm speaking. We share a common language. It is a social fact. That is why the signifier and the signified are both meaningful in this context. Now, the signifier, which is the word that I'm uttering, is auditory in nature. As we all know, the words that I'm uttering are useful and meaningful because you can hear them, which is why it is said that the signifier is auditory in nature. We hear it. The signifier also unfolds in time. This is very obvious because every word that I'm uttering is unfolding itself in time. So every word that I utter and every sentence that I make has a beginning and an end in time. And that beginning, that end is always linear. There is not a circular sentence here. Sentences cannot be circular because they begin and they end in linear time. We may say that syllables which are uttered have a more momentous quality. They have a more momentary quality. However, even in syllables, there is a beginning and an end. And at the end of every syllable, there is a new syllable to accompany it. Therefore, once again, we have the linear nature of the signifier. The signifier is thus linear in nature. It unfolds in time, and the elements of the auditory entity unfold in a sequence. So the signifier is meaningful because it is unfolding in a meaningful sequence, which is why it is making sense to the listener. At this point, it is important to discuss the nature of the signified as well as the signifier and how the combination of the two and the creation of the more complex and abstract sign is a meaningful idea, and how it is important to our social world as well. The signifier alone by itself would be meaningless. This is because the signifier is simply the word sound. It is the sound that I'm uttering. However, if that sound does not have a meaning behind it, then that sound would make no sense to the hearer. It would be meaningless. And the meaning exists because we have a shared language, because it is a social fact and not simply an individual fact. If I were to make random noises right now, that would be an individual fact. And that would be random and meaningless unless those noises have meaning to my listener as well. Therefore, the signifier alone is meaningless and simply sound. Similarly, if we look at the signified alone would not be able to be expressed. We need a signifier in order to express the signified. If we have a lot of thoughts in our mind, that is the concept. Those are ideas. And those are the core, the seeds of the signified. However, if they are not expressed, then they are not being signified. They're simply existing in our minds as concepts. So, in order for a signified to acquire, to manifest into our material reality, we need the signifier. And in order for the signifier to be meaningful in our material reality, we need the signified. Both of them alone would not make sense. They need to come together and form something more complex, more abstract, and bigger than themselves, bigger than the constituent parts, which is the sign, in order to be meaningful in our social world. Saussure also mentions two important exceptions in this scenario. One is the existence of onomatopoeic words, and secondly, interjections. Onomatopoeic words are words which directly represent the sound that these are words which represent sounds themselves. The pitter-patter of the rain sounds like pitter-patter, which is why the word pitter-patter is an onomatopoeic word. If we use words which represent sounds directly, those are onomatopoeic words. If we use the word clinking of spoons or clinking of cutlery, the word clink directly represents the kind of noise being made by the cutlery, which is why the word clink is an onomatopoeic word which is a signifier and which is meaningful in itself because it directly represents the word. But even then, of course, it has a signified within it. A second example is the interjection. A second exception is the interjection. Interjections are words which we use when we are exclaiming, when we are in a moment of shock or excitement. So interjections are words which have meaning on their own, in their own right. Because regardless of the culture that we are in, an expression of joy is easily perceptible. An expression of sadness is easily perceptible. An expression of shock or any other such emotion is easily perceptible. And these are expressions of shock, anger, emotion, which are interjections. So interjections and onomatopoeic words are the two exceptions in the context of the importance of the sign in making sense in our material reality. Next, we will look at the immutability and mutability of the sign. So Saussure tells us that the sign is immutable. It is essentially immutable because language cannot simply be changed willy-nilly. We cannot change language based on our own whims and fancies because language is a shared social fact. We cannot impose our own individual wishes and desires and change language as we want. Language is bigger than us all. Language precedes us. Language will succeed us. Language will exist regardless of us, regardless of our individual existence. At the same time, as we will look at later on, there is an idea of mutability of the sign as well. Now, first we will look at why the sign is immutable. Why is the sign or why is language unchangeable? The first reason that Saussure gives us is the arbitrary nature of the sign itself. Because the sign is arbitrary, because it doesn't have an organic relation with the referent, because it doesn't have an organic relation between its constituent parts, which is the signified and the signifier, that is why it prevents change. It prevents mutability. Therefore, the arbitrary nature of the sign is one of the main reasons behind the immutability of sign. The second reason is the historically inherited nature of language. This means that language exists before us. We always inherit language. And when we inherit something, it is impossible to change it as we want, because it is not something that we have created. It is something we have received. It is difficult to change something that we have received socially and something that is socially accepted regardless of our wishes. The third reason is the multiplicity of signs. Signs are so many in number. Language itself is so huge. Therefore, the vastness of language also prevents us from changing it. The vastness of language is also the multiplicity, the multiple nature of language also prevents us from changing it, also allows it to be immutable. Next, we will look at the complexity of the linguistic sign. So not only is the linguistic sign multiple in nature, vastly multiple in nature, it is also immensely complex. As we have discussed, the relationship between the sign and the referent is arbitrary, which makes it even more complex. It is not something that we can pin down and determine and put in a box. The very complex nature of the sign and the very complex nature of language itself, as a result, leads to the immutability of the sign. Finally, the collective inertia. Not only is the sign and the language collective in nature, there is also a collective inertia at work, which prevents the mutability of the sign. In the next section, we will look at the mutability of the sign. Now, while the sign is of course immutable, while language is of course immutable, and that is its fundamental nature, nonetheless, languages also change. In fact, sometimes the meanings of words also change. Some words become obsolete over time. Some words change completely over time. So now we will look at how language changes, how words change. And why does language change? Passage of time is an important reason. As time passes, as society changes, as times change, as cultural situations change, as the need arises for new words, perhaps with the coming of new inventions, with the coming of new social, technical, natural reasons. With that, and with the passage of time, language may also change. It may not change completely, but there may be small elements of change in language due to the passage of time. Secondly, change in relationship between the concept and the word. As I have mentioned before, sometimes the meanings of words may change, and that is the change in the relationship between the concept and the word. Thirdly, community of speakers. Language exists because there is a community of speakers to use it. And because there is a community of speakers to use it, language is both mutable and immutable. It is immutable because it is inherited. But at the same time, since there is a community of speakers using it, if there is a change in the culture, it could lead to a change in the language as well. In a particular generation, if a certain word is introduced or if a certain word is made obsolete, then it will lead to a mutability in the language. And this means that it is due to the community of speakers, due to the particular generation in the community of speakers, that there is a mutability in the language as well. Next, we will look at the concept of langue and parole. Both of these are French words. Langue refers to the structure of the language, and parole refers to the speech that we use. Language is the underlying structure. It is the grammar. It is that which informs our speech. And speech is our individual creation, created out of the permutations and combinations that we make from what we get in language. So the social structure of language is commonly and socially shared, and that is the langue. Langue is the underlying base, the language itself, the grammar of the language, which informs our thought, which informs our speech. And the structure of speech, which is the parole. Parole is something that we create individually on the basis of the langue that we have, on the basis of the language. So in language, there are not just individual parts, but connected parts. Each part of language, each word, each concept is connected to another. And through these connections, we have certain rules of language arising. Those rules are the grammar of language. We use this grammar to make our own speech. So there is an already existing structure of grammar underlying us, underlying language. This is the base. And on that base, we build our speech. Next, we will look at the concept of the linguistic binary and the creation of meaning. There is a fundamental binary in language. This means that in language, meaning is produced through binary. We call a pen because a pen is not anything else in the world. We call a laptop because it is a laptop and not anything else in the world. A tree is a tree because it is not a dog or a cat or anything else in the universe of material things. Therefore, there exists a binary meaning a twofold division between something and everything else that it is not. Therefore, it is through this binary, through this division between that which is and everything else that it isn't, that we can create a meaning for what exists, for what a thing is. If this distinction did not exist between that which it is and that which it isn't, then there would be no meaning in this world. Everything would be the same. Everything would be an undifferentiated mass in our brains, in our minds. We are able to make distinct representations. We are able to make distinct meaning because everything is not the same, because everything has a distinct identity. What is the value of language? Now, concepts and sounds. Concepts meaning signified or ideas, and sounds meaning signifier, that which is representing the ideas. Concepts and sounds are both shapeless, if not distinct, if not made distinct through signs, through language. For instance, if I utter a range of sounds right now which do not have a linguistic meaning, which do not have a linguistic value, then those sounds will make no sense to the listener. Similarly, in our heads, if we have a lot of thoughts, but we do not have a way to frame those thoughts, we do not have a way to make each thought distinct from another, then the thoughts themselves would simply be a shapeless, indiscriminate mass. They would make no meaning, they would make no sense to us. Concepts or thoughts in themselves, without something to distinguish them. So they are an undifferentiated mass. The chaos is therefore ordered through language, and that language is connected with the signifier and the signified. Another thing that we must remember is that social fact alone can create a linguistic system, for only consensus of the community can lead to general acceptance of language. This is very important to understand, because language is meaningful to us not because we make it meaningful, but because it is already an existing meaningful entity. And it is an already existing meaningful entity because it is a social fact, because it has been socially, commonly accepted by everyone around us. Therefore, in order to be able to give meaning to anything, be it a word, be it a sound, or be it a concept or a thought, be it a signifier or a signified, in order to give it meaning, we need the social world. We need the world which legitimizes signs. We need the world which accepts an existing system of signs. Without this world, without the social world which accepts the existing system of signs, there would be we would lack the ability to give meaning to either sounds or concepts. We may think that concepts exist in our mind meaningfully already, but they exist meaningfully because we are thinking of those concepts, and we are thinking of those concepts always through language. We do not think outside of language. Every thought that exists in our brain exists through language. Everything that we think, even if we are not uttering it out loud, even if we are simply keeping it in our minds, we are thinking it through a language. We are not thinking of it without language. Therefore, every idea that comes to our head exists through language. And therefore, it is through language that even in our minds, meaning is made. Even though language exists outside of our minds, even though language exists in a social world which is external to our body, which is external to our mind, nonetheless, within our mind and within our body, meaning is produced through that which is external to it, through language. And in a sense, we may even say that language exists within our mind as well. We inherit it. We inherit it and we imbibe it. We allow it to grow within us. And we have no choice, because that is the way in which we make meaning even within ourselves, even within our own minds, even in solitude. From a conceptual perspective, the value of a word is more than what it signifies. This means that from the perspective of the signified, from the perspective of the concept or the idea which is being expressed, the value of a word is more than just the meaning which it represents. Similarly, from the material perspective, which is the perspective of the signifier, it is being called the material perspective because it is the word sound, and the word sound exists in our material world. We say that it exists in our material world because we can hear it with our sense organs. Anything that we can perceive with our sense organs exists in the material world. We may not be able to see sound, but we can hear it. Therefore, it exists in the material world. So from a material perspective, the value of a word is more than what it sounds like. We cannot determine the value of a word simply because it sounds a certain way, unless we know its meaning. And nor can we understand the meaning of a word simply because it has something to represent, unless it is uttered, unless it is expressed. We cannot think of the value of a sign only from the view of a signified or only from the view of a signifier. We have to, whenever we think of the value of a sign, we have to think of it from the view of the sign itself, from a view of the combination of the signifier and the signified, which leads to something greater than both, which leads to something beyond both, which leads to something abstract and more complex than both the signifier and the signified, which is the meaningful sign itself. So considering the totality of the sign, the value of a word is relational and based on difference with the rest of the words. This means that the meaning of the sign, the meaningful nature of the sign is produced based on the binary that we have already discussed, based on the differences it has with the rest of the words that exist. A word is meaningful, a word is individual, it has an individual identity because it is no other word. Similarly, a concept has an individual identity because it is no other concept. Words, concepts, as well as the combination of words and concepts have individual identity and have individual meaning because they can be differentiated from the rest of the universe, from the rest of the universe of words, from the rest of the universe of sounds, as well as from the rest of the universe of concepts. Therefore, when we are looking at the value of a sign, when we are looking at the linguistic value of a sign, we must understand it both through differentiation, through the binary, through the delineation of the sign, as well as through the combination of the signifier and the signified. We cannot take the signifier or the signified separately in order to understand the value of the sign itself. We must always think of it as a combination because it is through that combination that the sign is produced. With this, we conclude the study of Saussure structuralism. Thank you.